every challenging experience that we have, we need to use it. We need to add it to our repository to be able to document, okay, I did this, I got through that. Now I can do the next thing and then the next thing. And it's so important to be conscientious of how we can convert our pain points and our gain points into our assets. It's essential.
Welcome to another episode of the Hope Strategy Podcast. I said that like another was 2 words. I guess another episode of the Hope Strategy Podcast. Corey Blake and Josh Steimley here. We've just wrapped up a fantastic conversation with Natalie Nixon. Natalie Nixon is the president and founder of Figure 8 Thinking. She advises leaders and executive teams on how to achieve transformative business results by applying creativity and foresight. Clients have included Comcast, Citrix, Living Cities, VaynerMedia, and Bloomberg. A hybrid thinker, Natalie consistently applies her background in cultural anthropology and fashion. She began her career in education and as a hat designer. Later, Natalie worked in global apparel sourcing for a division of The Limited, Inc. Previous to Figure 8 Thinking, she was a professor for 16 years. Natalie is an early stage investor at 2 social impact ventures. She's valued for her ability to work at the intersection of commercial value and stakeholder equity. She's lived in Germany, Brazil, Portugal, Israel, Sri Lanka, and is proficient in Portuguese and Spanish. She is a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, a fellow of the Royal Society of Art, and is certified as a foresight practitioner by the Institute for the Future. When she's not dancing up a storm in hip hop class, Natalie is fine-tuning for foxtrot, salsa, and tango in the ballroom. She lives in her hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with her husband, John Nixon, and is the proud stepmother to Sydney. What were your thoughts, Josh, on that conversation?
I feel like we could have talked a lot more. I really wanted to get into her book and learn more about the creativity leap. But her story was interesting at the beginning, how her parents took her out of this environment she was comfortable in, the school where it was 98% Black and hardly any white people, and then put her in a school where it was the opposite, where she was, I think she said that there were 2 other Black kids besides her and her sibling. Mm-hmm. And so they doubled the number of Black kids in that school. And she was called the N-word the first week or something as a 9-year-old and had to adjust to this entirely new environment.
Listen into what she defines as boundary spanning, as she's experienced so many different things in life and been put in a lot of situations. I loved that conversation. She has a very similar background, minus the fact that I only have a bachelor's degree and she has a master's and PhD, but she studied anthropology and specifically as it pertains to Africana cultures. And I studied international culture studies with a communications and anthropology emphasis. So I feel like some people, you know how you just talk and you get it, you connect, and you kind of speak in the same language. I love that conversation. She's done everything from academia, getting a PhD and exploring that, to being a professor for 16 years, to being an entrepreneur of a small startup, and then doing now consulting and speaking and building out strategies for some of the largest companies out there on the creative side. I can't wait to look into her book a little bit more and keep in touch with her. Yeah. Enjoy the conversation with Natalie Nixon. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've heard me and Josh talk about MWI, which is our digital marketing agency. If you're new around here, this may be a first introduction to MWI. We're a full-service digital marketing agency that specializes in everything from website design and development to search engine optimization and all forms of paid advertising, whether it's paid social advertising or paid search advertising, content marketing, digital PR, social media management. Basically anything a business needs to strengthen and grow their digital footprint is what we do over at MWI. The website is mwi.com. And for any listeners of the Hope Strategy Podcast, I'd love to offer a free 20-minute consultation with yours truly to talk about your business, to talk about your goals, to understand, what you need to be doing from a digital marketing strategy and action plan standpoint in order to yield some results and grow your business online. So please reach out at mwi.com/hope strategy. That's mwi.com/hope strategy to sign up, and we will be in touch. Now back to the show.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was I'm experienced now, professional.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley. I really am fascinated with your, as so many people are. I've listened to a few podcasts that you were on, so I know it's going to be repetitive a little bit, but you've got such a great story. I guess that's your fault. You have to share it with with everybody else. But I love the trajectory of your life, from where you grew up to where places you've ended up and lessons you've learned all along the way. So I want to touch on that. And then I also want to talk about the entrepreneurial side of you and how you've gone from being a, academic of sorts to a teacher, to a entrepreneur, to a successful businesswoman, to, all of the above. And so we'll try to get all of that in 40 minutes, since I promised you we'd be done at the top of the hour. So tell us, cliche as it is, I know you've told this story a lot. You grew up in Philadelphia. Tell us about your upbringing, and now that hindsight is what it is, maybe some of those lessons that you learned or some of the people that impacted you early on in order to kind of put you on the trajectory that you've been on for throughout your life.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Corey and Josh. It's really great to be part of this conversation. Yeah, so I grew up in Philly. And I grew up in the northwest section of Philadelphia, a community called Mount Airy. And I jokingly say now, I grew up on the proletariat side of Mount Airy. So Mount Airy is divided by an avenue called Germantown Avenue. And there's West Mount Airy and there's East Mount Airy. And West Mount Airy is very crunchy. If you know that television show Portlandia, there's a lot of that going on in West Mount Airy. Beautiful single stone homes and beautiful twins and a lot of, white collar professionals. And there's some blue collar mixed up in there. Mount Airy has consistently been heralded as one of America's most integrated communities by USA Today, probably like once a decade, but that's probably on a block to block basis. Philly historically has been a pretty black and white city. We have the unfortunate, status of being America's largest poorest city. And there's a host of reasons for that. I grew up in East Mount Airy, and on my block, there were cops and secretaries and nurses. And I really credit my parents. Those are the first people who came to mind when you asked your question, Corey. So I have parents who are African-American. My father, I proudly say, he was truly a race man. He loved being a black man. I grew up sitting on his lap, trying to understand why he loved Muhammad Ali. Ali. And those are our television was a little black and white television screen. And I remember Howard Cosell, but a man like Muhammad Ali really gave my father such. It was a conduit for him to really have pride in who he was. He passed away. He died in 2012. But my father was oddly chauvinistic and old school, but also, he taught us, girls, this is the right way to cut grass. This is how you wash a car. Mm-hmm. You must always have your own. That was harped into us. And my mother, who is still alive, was in many ways a frustrated artist. She was a weaver. She really, when she was a girl, wanted to be an opera singer. She grew up in Pittsburgh. My father grew up in Harrisburg. And one of these folks who never really found a way to earn her living through her art. But through both of my parents, what was passed down to me was an incredible sense of self, of who I am as an African American in the United States, and a real appreciation for the spectrum of art. From my mother's side, visual arts, but also musical arts, because my mother, when she turned 50, she learned to play the cello.
Oh, wow.
And she's 81 now. And she's
plot
still
twist.
What did you say?
I said plot twist. 50 years old learning the cello.
She's full of those. Awesome. My father, big jazz head. So I grew up listening to a lot of Blue Note albums in the home. And so I went to 3 very different types of schools growing up. And I grew up in a time when literally our mother in the summertime could say, okay, go outside and play, and you need to be back home by the time the streetlights come on.
Yeah.
It wasn't that wanderlust all the time. It was like, you need to be within my shouting distance, or I need to see you across the street. But it was a really happy childhood where we roamed a lot on our bicycles. Half the time, my mother had no idea where my sister and I were venturing out to. Played hopscotch, double dutch. We would have races up and down the street. My father would not allow us to go down the street to the rec center where all the guys were playing basketball. And I later understood why, because he didn't want the teenage boys roaming too close to his daughters. But a childhood where I was firmly rooted in the city. And I started out in urban Philadelphia public schools and quickly sensed that my parents weren't satisfied with how I was learning, because my mother really fought to make sure I was placed in an AP advanced placement sort of classroom, where I quickly deciphered that in a school that was 98% Black, I was the only little chocolate chip in the classroom, these little broken out sections with harder, air quotes, harder work. And I would complain about it. And I'd say, I don't want to go to those classes. And my mother would say, why don't you want to go? And I'd say, because my friends aren't in those classes. And she'd say, that's why you're in those classes. And my pop figured out that context, this is 1975 through 1978 in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And this was the kind of the beginning of the end of a lot of urban public school education, funding support, and definitely was not integrated. And I think, to this day, public schools in America remain one of the most segregated spaces and institutions in our country.
Can I ask a question about that specifically? So my first question real quick, and then I want to get back into that, is are you familiar with Will Reynolds? I don't expect you to know him personally, but you know who that is?
I think so. Tell me more.
He's the founder and CEO of Seer Interactive, started in Philadelphia, digital marketing agency. Anyways, we interviewed him a few weeks ago. His episode went live today.
Yes.
So good. You got to listen to it. The Philly story, the upbringing. I'll listen to it. I promise you won't regret it. It's a good one. Okay. Anyways, getting back. So this is a sensitive question here, but I'm curious, and I've got you here, so I'm going to ask. When you're growing up and you're going to a school that's 98% Black, 2% white, you're the, like you said, you're the only African American in these AP classes, and your mom's telling you, and you're saying, well, my friends aren't in these classes. I'm repeating what you just said, but then she goes, well, that's why I want you in this classes. How does an African American parent in the 70s, and I mean in the 2020s as well, walk that line between saying, I want better for you, I want you to accomplish great things, but that's not, that in and of itself is separating the two, right? It's like, well, they're not and you are. That's an interesting. And again, so I studied, by the way, you studied anthropology, with an emphasis in like Africana studies or something. I studied anthropology, international culture studies. So I think you and I are very fascinated in a lot of the same types of things from what I've heard and read and stuff.
Yes.
So how does an African American mom and dad in that situation communicate that to you in a way that is hope-filled and optimistic, and you're going to do great things without separating the two so vastly that it causes some sort of issue?
I love your question. And, I can't remember when my parents, I don't ever recall my parents explaining race in a preparatory way. Mm-hmm. When they did have conversations with us about race. So actually, in 1976, one of the 3 major television networks aired Roots, and it was this miniseries. And I was 6 years old, and my parents had me watching this, and there's pretty heavy stuff that goes on in Roots. And so when I say, for people who listeners who may not understand what a race man is, that's just kind of it refers to an African American man who is incredible pride and deeply rooted in his ethnic identity.
Who was he named after again? I heard you say he was named after somebody.
Yeah, his name was Frederick Douglass Weathers.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which added more fuel to his fire of clarity on who he was and from whom he's descended. And to this day, I proudly say I am a descendant of enslaved African Americans. And recently, a family friend did a genealogy tree, and I saw that I'm descended from Black people in America dating back to 1792. And that's just like mind blowing. Yeah. It's a little dizzying, and it's deeply affirming. So great question about that, because all conversations around race wasn't an other conversation. It was always like, this is who you are. Mm-hmm. And even the need to move to another type of learning environment, my parents didn't couch it as race or racial. They didn't racialize it for us. And I know that to be true because the next school I went to in a suburb of Philadelphia, I was called the N-word for the first time. I was 9 years old. I was a fourth grader. And my sister and I overnight doubled the Black population in the school. And I was like, whoa, because I went from a world that was brown and Black, my block, my family, my school, my church, like that's what I knew. And I knew people looked different, but again, it wasn't racialized. And then I get to this other school where we were learning the 3 R's very well. The fundamentals of learning were there. It was a place where there was definitely, it felt like a lot more order, but socially it was a ice bucket of water. And those same group of boys who for those first couple of weeks of school called me that. We were buddies by the end of that year because I happened to be athletic. Play and sports is a way that kids can connect and make friends. And frankly, they were repeating things that they were hearing at home. And this was a school community that was predominantly more blue collar, Irish American, Polish American, Italian American folks. And that was when my parents had to break down what was happening at age 9 for me to navigate that. And my father was this constant presence in that time of my life. He would just appear in the school. He would just, I'd be doing a worksheet, and my desk in fourth grade was in eyesight of the doorway to the classroom, and I would see my peripheral, this shadow, and I would look and be my father's shoes, and then I'd see his trench coat and then him, and he would just be smiling. He'd just be looking in. And sometimes I'd be moving with the group of students to gym or art, I don't know. And I'd see him down the hall, like talking to the principal. So he always made himself present. And then, so I went from urban public to suburban public to elitist prep school. And I went for high school from 7th through 12th grade. And I've shared the story before that in the 8th grade, I realized it was just this flash of enlightenment that my friends back home on the block and my Black friends in public school, and then my newly formed friendships in this predominantly white environment where the culture of learning was significantly different. We were being trained in public school to not go outside the guardrails. We were being educated to fill in the dots. And I had gotten excellent at giving teachers what they wanted. I was a great student and did that. And I went to this other environment in prep school, this wonderful, great education, Quaker prep school, where the mission was ask a better friggin' question, like challenge me. And I think it took me 2 years to get used to that. First of all, where I came from, you don't call adults by their first name. And, this was Quaker, it was crunchy. It was like, it was, and then a lot of Quaker schools, it's like teacher Ann, teacher Joe. It wasn't even teacher, right? So there were all of these barriers to entry for me to even get comfortable, for my mind just to loosen up and be able to flow with to optimize my intelligence and my character and who I was. And
you have a term for that you've later dubbed what? I heard you talk about, I'm trying to remember, I don't have it on my notes, but this process of going through expanding like your cultural horizons and
boundary spanning.
I loved that because I'm somebody who grew up in a military family and traveled around all over the place and always had to adapt to these new, in Japan and Germany, and then moving from Germany, going into high school to Southern Utah, where I'm native, my descendants are Native American. And so even though they're also really British and stuff as well, but I've got darker skin. And I remember going into that, and it was the first time that I realized that somebody called me brown, because I grew up a military kid with like African Americans and Filipinos and Mexicans and whatever. And I walked in and it was like, oh, the brown kid from Germany. And I'm like, I guess I am a different color than everybody. It was like, right. And so when you said that, the boundary spanning, you said, right?
Yes.
It rang true to me. Like, as I've lived my life, you're constantly expanding where those boundaries are and what the expectations are that you need to live within. Anyways, I just wanted to bring that up, but keep going with your story.
No, thank you for bringing that up, because that was each of those transitions were, now I can call them opportunities. Mm-hmm. Back then they were work and exercises.
And trauma sometimes.
And trauma, yeah. Right? Absolutely trauma for me to reorient myself, for me to reposition myself, for me to identify, okay, what's the value that I have in this situation? What can I add? Mm-hmm. What can I gain? And what can I learn? And in each of these sorts of chapters of my life, what I now understand to be true is that, and this is, I think, for the case of, for any of us, whenever we find ourselves on the margins, on the boundary, while it initially can feel pretty stark, very scary, very alienating, what we are exercising and cultivating is perspective. Because think about that. When you are on the boundary, when you're on the periphery, you have the ability to zoom out. And what that meant was I had to cultivate incredible capacity for keen observational skills. I had to become multilingual. I remember growing up in the neighborhood where I grew up, where I took 2 buses to school. Well, if I got up earlier, I could walk to one bus stop versus take a 10 block bus ride. And the kids who also took one of those bus rides went to King High School, Martin Luther King High School, which was supposed to be my community high school, and Germantown High School. Now, back in the 80s, Black kids and white kids dressed distinctively differently. Black kids would take their Vidal Sassoon jeans and their Jordache jeans to the cleaners, and you wanted a crease in your jeans. Mm-hmm. And the white kids I was going to high school with their mothers would plop, $90 on a pair of Guess jeans, and then they would take scissors and rip holes in the knees. And my mother would never, we could not afford for her to take us to Bloomingdale's to buy a pair of Guess jeans. And I was learning to play field hockey. So I had to navigate how I was going to fit in on the bus so that I wouldn't get picked on, and sit quietly, and then figure out how to then get off that bus and seamlessly fit into this other very different culture. People don't realize that hip hop totally democratized youth, like around the world. Like today, young people dress, speak, slang is seamless, whether you're in Seoul, South Korea, or Detroit. And it's because of hip hop. And if you think about it, so I'm Gen X, I'm the generation that birthed hip hop, rap and hip hop. We were in the middle of this cauldron that we had no idea really what was coming, what was emerging. But what was emerging was this democratizing agent, which is how I think about hip hop culture, hip hop music, hip hop language, hip hop style and dress. But anyway, this boundary spanning point, every time I was in these new environments, I was having to figure out, okay, how do I traverse this? And multiple times in a day. And eventually, not until like my early 30s, did I realize what an asset that was.
Well, yeah, you don't think about it in the moment, obviously, but man, can you imagine the lessons and the skill set and the mental fortitude, and also, again, like I said before, the anxieties that maybe we're building, whatever, all of this stuff. This is such a man, that's intense. That having to manage all of those things as a teenager or as a preteen, how to engage and interact in that society with those peoples, with, on that bus ride, that's so intense. And you brought up hip hop culture. I wanted to ask you about this. Kind of goes back to the question I asked about your parents, but somebody, Jay-Z said once that he went back to the hood where he used to literally be on the corner, dealing drugs and making it happen, as he knew how to make it happen in that time in New York City, in that place, and how he went back, and how when he started getting successful and he had become what he is today, this unbelievable mogul and successful rapper and businessman and entrepreneur and all these things, people would say, man, you've changed. And he was like, well, no, duh, I've changed. Like, exactly. I'm sure I can guarantee Jay-Z didn't say no, duh. That was, but but you can get what I'm saying. He was like, that's the point. I've changed. I've gone and made something of myself. I've given back to my community, and I married Beyonce, for crying out loud, right? But you've seen that as well, I'm sure, on some scale, where you're saying, like, this is the block. These are the people that I grew up with. This is the hopscotch crew. And these are the people I was out with until the streetlights came on. But then your parents are saying, you need to go to this suburban elitist high school, whatever. And then again, we're going to get to, hopefully, geez Louise, time goes by too fast, but some of the next steps that you took, how did you balance that? How did you juggle that, that success and that prosperity and that growth and things that you were seeing with kind of these roots that you had growing up on the block, as you put it, there in Philadelphia with the people you grew up with? Is that something you've noticed, or is that just not something you even had to ever even consider, the you've changed thing?
I think I was very aware of it in the moment by following my mother's advice to dig in even more strongly to who I am. She didn't use these words, but to do you, to be okay with being who you are. And it was often hard. It was often awkward, super awkward. It was, and in anything in life, whatever we focus on, that's what we get better at. And that's what gets larger. So I remember the first year in this prep high school, in seventh grade, first of all, 7th, 8th grade, they just suck, period. Like, I don't know well, maybe some people loved it. I would never want to go back to that time.
There's no winning in that situation. Yeah.
No, but there were times at lunchtime, I didn't know who to sit with. I was too late. There's no chair space. Like, how junior high is, it's hard.
I've been there.
And you're right. And I would come home and I would cry and be upset. And I'd be like, I didn't have anyone to sit together at lunch, or no one came over to me. And my mother she said, listen, what you do is you go into that lunchroom and you sit down and you have your lunch. And eventually people will say to themselves, who is that girl over there? She seems so okay being to herself. And those people will come to you and you'll start talking to them. And those are the people who will be your friends. And I was like, what? How am I going to do that? But I didn't have any other options. So I tried it. And it was exactly as she said. The people who I needed to befriend and who sought me out naturally out of kindness and compassion became my new crew and the people who became my friends. So in the moment, what I became aware of was having the courage just to be myself, the courage to be, I love, the comedian, the African-American woman who's a comedian she did the Awkward Black Girl series. She's much younger than me, but that captured me so well. I was awkward Black girl. I was awkward Black girl eventually around my Black friends back home. Then I was awkward Black girl sometimes in these wider environments. So in the moment, I became more solid and okay to be me. I had a different conversation a few days ago where I was talking to a group of graduate students at Northwestern, and I was talking about how we have to build an inventory of courage. And the professor said, that was really interesting what you just said. You should write that down. I was like, what did I just say? He said that phrase, inventory of courage. So I actually did a short little social media video blip about it. Because I was like, okay, that resonates with people. Let me think more about that. But that actually, every challenging experience that we have, we need to use it. We need to add it to our repository to be able to document, okay, I did this, I got through that. Now I can do the next thing and then the next thing. And literally my inventory of courage goes back to being a first grader in public school, lining up at the end of recess to go inside. And there was a little girl who was impoverished. And I know now she was not well because she smelled like urine during the day. And she was angry and she was sad. And she picked up on me constantly because I smelled like baby lotion and Jergens. She was like, ugh, she couldn't stand my guts.
Yeah.
And she constantly picked on me. And one day, she at lining up to go back in school, she busted in front of me in line. And the kind of school I went to, you had to know how to fight. And so what I did is I always had friends who knew how to fight because I hated fighting. And she busted in front of me and I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, hey, you busted in front of me. And she said, so what you gonna do, kick my butt? And I said, she just turned her back at me and I was like, okay. So I literally went to the back of the line, took a running start and kicked her in the behind. And she never bothered me again. And so when I say we need to have this inventory of courage, literally that became the example for the next time. And then the next, and then it became the boys who called me the N-word. And then, right? So it's so important to be conscientious of how we can convert our pain points and our gain points into our assets. It's essential.
I love that inventory of courage, especially as a father to 4 young kids. And I think you're onto something with that. We just interviewed somebody who's a children's book author just right before you. And I'm thinking immediately like, oh, that would be a great journal of some sort to have for a kid that was where you're keeping your inventory of courage, your inventory of hope, your inventory of whatever, like what are the lessons that I learned on these things that, we'll have to talk on the side.
Yeah.
There is so much power in that though, because once you've done something, you can check it off and say, hey, I've done that. No problem. I can do it again. I remember the first time I gave a speech in front of a large audience. It was a TEDx event in Hong Kong, and it was over 1,000 people. And when I went out on stage, my lip started shaking and my leg was shaking. I was like, what is going on? Like, I don't really feel nervous, but like different parts of my body are like not doing what they're supposed to do. But now it's kind of like, oh, I've already done that. I can check it off. So if I go speak in front of a large audience, it's like, I've done this. And I just tell myself that.
Yes, I've been here before. That's exactly it. The ability to recognize and acknowledge, okay, maybe not the exact matchy apples way, but I've been here before. I can move through this.
Yeah, for sure. I could talk to you about that all day. A shout out to Nate Clements in 9th grade when I moved into this small town in southern Utah, and I was eating lunch in the hall every day, taking my lunch and just like Josh in front of 1,000 people, knees shaking, going out into the hall and sitting. And then one day, Nate, who's still my buddy to this day, was like, dude, hey, come over. Why don't you come sit with us over here? And I was like, oh my God. I mean, the impact that has on a 9th grade kid who's trying to figure things out was unbelievable. So Nate, if you're listening, thank you. You have gone on. So we're going to skip way ahead here, but I do want to touch on everything between what we're talking about right now and figure 8 thinking. You're the main thing that you work on at this point, but talk to us about Nat's hats, right? The entrepreneurial effort, but the master's degree in between there, the PhD in England that you got, like there's so much going on here. So walk us through the next years of education and studying and kind of personal development that continue to, shape you and mold you into who you are.
The best way I can explain my incredibly loopy background is to credit my parents again, because I was a sophomore in college. I was coming up to the deadline of having to declare my major. I had no idea what that should be because I was fixated on wanting to please them. I was fixated on wanting to make sure I didn't mess up, that I got a good job at the end of a very expensive and wonderful education. I was acutely aware of how much they had sacrificed for education. I didn't want to disappoint them. And all of the impressive sounding majors like economics, political science, were just boring to me. And I'd almost failed econ. I took it pass fail and then like studied my behind afterwards. And I realized I could have gotten out with a B if I just, hung in there. But it was just like, it wasn't flowing. And I called them upset and I said, I have to declare a major soon. I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to study. And they said, well, what are you interested in? I started rattling off all the stuff I was bad at and stuff that I found boring, I wasn't good at, but I thought maybe they thought that sounded like the right thing to do. And they said, okay, what are you interested in? What are you enjoying? And so I apologetically began to explain how I really loved these Africana studies courses. And I just started taking this anthropology class. It was amazing. And almost at the same time, they said, that's what you should study. And I was like, wait, what? So you guys would be okay if I studied anthropology? They're like, I said, and maybe make it a double major with Africana studies? They were like, yes. And I said, okay. And my father said, Natalie, if you study what you love, you're going to have to turn down opportunities. And it was like this load left at me. Load was released from my shoulders. And they gave me permission to follow my heart. And you have to understand, I talk to so many people who are strivers, whether they are African Americans, where education is so prime in our community, or they're immigrants, or they're first gen college students, where there's so much pressure to not mess up, to do the right thing. And most families, well-meaning parents are, trying, they want their kids to do the air quotes, practical thing.
Be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a dentist,
That's right. So the fact that my parents, in the midst of all that, they quieted all that noise, they listened to me and they said, study what you're enjoying. It was huge. I to this day, I think it's one of the greatest gifts they ever gave me.
Can I tell you that I had a very similar experience where, and again, we studied a very similar thing. I was, my undergrad, my associate's degree was just in general studies because I didn't know and I couldn't stand it. I failed math multiple times. I was in the math lab every day and pulled off like a 71%, at like the third try. And I remember I was married, I got married young, and I would tell my wife, like, I think I got to be done. I'm just going to go the entrepreneurial route. I got to figure something out. And it wasn't my parents, but through some prayer and meditation stuff, just trying to decide, do I need to go back to school or not? Is this important? The overwhelming feeling that I had was stop worrying about what you're going to do with as a career and just do something that you love and it'll work out.
Yes.
And just that and so I taught at the same college that I graduated from. I went back as an entrepreneur in residence and taught students for 2 years. And that's one of the things I would tell them, because you could see some of the students, you could just see it in their eyes, like, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to. I'm here. I don't enjoy it in the slightest. And so what it did, it was the same thing, that weight lifted off my shoulders, where it was like, oh, I can enjoy this. I can go and I can study anthropology and communications and cultures and languages that I just was innately so in tune with and inspired by and motivated by. And it was a game changer for me. But yeah, I know the exact feeling. Again, a little bit different, but very similar.
And you know what I tell any young person who cares to listen, they ask for advice. It's actually a much more efficient way to live.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
I'm a solidly middle-aged woman now. And so I've witnessed lots of middle-aged life crises. And really what it comes down to is people have been chasing the dollars, or they're in the golden handcuffs, and they're realizing now they need to regroup totally, which takes a lot of work to figure out what thrills me, what brings me to tears, what isn't even work to me. What comes to me easily? The other people are like, how do you do that? And I'm just like, it's just fun. That's what I like to do. So I credit my parents for this path that didn't always make sense to people on the outside, but I was literally following my heart. I always say that I've never had a 5-year plan, definitely not a 10-year plan. And at every fork in the road that I've arrived at, it's because I realized I have to do a reset. Something isn't quite right. This work is no longer bringing me joy. So when I started Nat's Hats, my hat design company in the early 90s in New York City, I did it out of need. I did it because I couldn't afford to buy all the pretty frocks and all the boutiques in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And so I went back to what I knew. My mother taught us to sew when we were girls, and I sewed my winter coat. I sewed outfits for work, and I sewed a few hats. And my friends started saying, Nat, you should sell this. I would totally buy this. And eventually I gathered up the courage. I went to my inventory of courage and walked into a boutique on the Upper West Side where I like to window shop, introduced myself as a hat designer, and asked to meet with the owner or manager. Said, you're talking to her. And I had the hat on my head, 2 hats at home, and said, I'm a hat designer. And she said, great, let's set up an appointment. You can show me your line. At the time, I didn't know the difference between a collection and inventory. So mm-hmm. I was kind of, but she bought all of my hats outright. And that, there are so many things in my life. If I had known how hard it was going to be, I would have never tried it. But doing Nat's Hats gave me this incredible excitement about business in terms of taking something from a concept, an idea, to something tangible that people can experience and be able to make money from it. And that led to me deciding to stop. There's a short chapter of my life where I was a middle school, high school English teacher. I was a good teacher. And at the time, I think I was 26, 27. And I remember saying, I don't want to wake up one day when I'm old and 40 and wonder what if I had tried something else, which is hilarious. Yeah. I'm much older than 40 now. But that, led me to do this master's degree in global textile marketing, which took me to live and study in Israel and Germany. That led to an offer to join Mast Industries, which at the time was a division of the Limited brands, where I was really in a lot of ways postgraduate work because I got exposed to global sourcing. I often advise folks when they're first graduating, look at the first couple of years out as postgraduate work. Try to get a job with a company that has all the resources at hand and soak up all of the knowledge that you can about what you can do when you have all the resources of infrastructure and financing available to you. And I learned from my stint working in fashion about financial acumen, the role of technology and logistics, but also the role of aesthetics and desire and beauty and developing consumer insight, which most sectors forsake. And fashion totally gets that and embraces that. And that's become an asset in the way I built out strategy. And then I became a professor because I was tired of being in different time zones from my family. I realized there were aspects of teaching that I missed. And I did a series of informational interviews, which led to an invitation to come to, at the time it was Philadelphia University. It's now Thomas Jefferson University. Because I had industry experience, I had a master's degree, I had some teaching experience. So I taught, and I was humming along as a professor in the fashion management program at the university when more of my mentors were saying, you should consider getting a doctorate. You're a great professor, give you more options. I was like, I don't know. I don't really need to prove how smart I am in a little bitty area. But I would investigate a couple programs here and there. And in the United States, all the programs, pretty much people were in school for like a minimum of 5 years, average 7 years. They were required to quit their full-time job, enroll full-time as a graduate student, live off this measly fellowship. I was like, at the time I was single, I had a mortgage on my own. I loved my work. I was like, why would I do that? I'm not going to do that. And then I was on my way to London for a completely different reason, like 2005, 2006. And a week before I left, a friend forwarded me an email about this topic called design management and said, this is totally you. It's strategy and creativity, design and business. I thought, what is it? I Googled it, learned it was huge in Europe and the UK. And long story short, identify some universities in London while I was over there to interview and check it out. And long story short, ended up applying to getting accepted to enrolling at the University of Westminster. And the difference between the British system and the American system is that it's much more like independent study, and there's a deadline.
Yeah.
So I was required to finish within 3 to 4 years, or the clock would start over again. So that chapter of my professional development was just a game changer. Number one, I actually remember all of a sudden feeling a little smarter, because I would have to read these darn academic journal articles like 4 times and underline, and then go back and take notes and then type up my notes. These are all the different ways I had broken down ways to understand. And all of a sudden I realized academic language is quite formulaic. And once I understood the formula, I was able to digest it better. But that foray took me into this space of design thinking, design strategy, design management, service design. And it was like hashtag mind blown. And yeah.
What a whirlwind, I can't remember how you put it, but just like the background, I love that you're, right at the top of your bio, it's like your background's in fashion and anthropology. And I love seeing the way that's weaved in and out all across the globe. And, as you've done all of these different things.
Corey, you use anthropology every single day.
Every single day. Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah. People ask me all the time. It was funny because at the school I went to, I was kind of like the, what's the word? I don't know how to describe it, but I studied international culture studies, anthropology, communications, but I took a few entrepreneurship classes. Josh and I started working together on the agency when I was a senior in college. And so I was taking these entrepreneurship classes, and everybody's like, why is this ICS, as they call it, international culture studies? Why are you over here in entrepreneurship classes? I was the only one taking these classes. And so, now people always ask me, and when I went back and taught at the university, actually, the first thing I did was send out a mass email to the International Culture Studies department. And I said, I studied ICS. I went on and started a successful business. I use what I studied in international culture studies, anthropology, communications every single day. I've opened an office internationally, and we've grown there. And even just in my interpersonal communication, right? Every single day, understanding people and where they make their meaning and why they do what they do and what makes them tick. And so I had the first class that I taught, I had 50 or 60 students in it when they thought I'd have 5 or 6, and like 40 of them were from the ICS program. And I've kept in touch with a lot of them. So it's kind of interesting. People always ask me, well, how do you use that? And it's like, oh, I talk to people every day and I have to interact with people. And it's
curiosity, deep observational skills, self-reflection about why I do things the way I do them, how the impact, it just is incredible training for what I call the worm's eye view of society, right? I think about sociology and econ and poli-sci as the bird's eye view of society, 30,000 foot level view. But because you're interested in what makes people tick from smaller units, cultural units, and through different angles, whether it's language or artifact or ritual, you realize every single thing has a culture. And once you're equipped with those tools, it's a really groovy way to make sense of phenomenon that you don't initially understand, whether it's exploring a new market or figuring out a different business model or what have you.
Yeah, 100%. I'm right there with you. I understand it. I need to go back and get a master's of some sort or a PhD at some point. Those are two things that I want to do at some point. So tell me about, we're going to jump ahead again, but tell me about Figure 8. So at this point, what do you do? I saw a lot of the companies you worked with, Comcast, Citrix, Living Cities. What did you do for Vayner Media?
Actually, I'm still working with Vayner Media. It started out with my interviewing Claude Silver, who is their chief heart officer.
Oh, yeah.
For my new book, The Creativity Leap. I also interviewed one of the designers, Adam Locke, and then they invited me to come in and do some foresight strategy sessions with their creative team and strategy team. And I'm going to be working with their strategy group. And a lot of what I do with my clients at Figure 8 Thinking are around, I call them foresight studios. So I apply a lot of creativity techniques and foresight techniques into the way I help my clients envision a different future. I've also started framing my work much more as advisory work, advising leadership teams. And I do a ton of speaking. I love speaking. I really think about public speaking as this combination of storytelling and prototyping ideas. Every time I share out on a talk, I'm reframing the way I've been thinking about a concept, an idea, and seeing how I get immediate feedback and understand how it lands with people. But the way I started figure eight thinking was really as a side hustle. I had given a TEDx Philadelphia talk in 2014, and that catapulted me into getting invited into companies and organizations to share with them the gist of the talk, which was that the future of work is jazz. And if you're not an improvisational organization, you're in trouble. And here's why, and here's how to do more of it. And after about 5 months of that, my husband, John, who's an attorney, he's a different type of beautiful brain. He's a planner. He said, babe, this is like a thing. You need to formalize this. I was like, okay. So I created this LLC. And I remember the night we were in the kitchen, he's like, okay, so what's the name? What are you going to call it? I was like, I don't know yet. And I gave him a few different ideas. And figure eight was one. He's like, well, why figure eight? Like, what's ice skating have to do with it? I was like, it's not about ice skating. It's about the iteration of thinking. It's about the iterative build and revisiting an idea and then building it back out. And then I said, but also, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I need to move and tinker and make in order to learn. So for all those reasons, that's why I landed on figure eight thinking. It's
a great name. And it got me thinking earlier when I read it, I just, my mind immediately was like, figure eight. Oh, that's a great name for creative. Oh, I like went on a little sidetrack for a minute, like thinking of all of the different things you're talking about how it's continuous. It's never ending. It's iterative. Like you said, it doesn't specifically with a brand or a design strategy or whatever. It's not something that you do and then you're done. We tell our clients that all the time. Like, look, we're going to build out these strategies for you. We're going to build a website for you. We're going to make sure that it's all built and strategized exactly right for right now. But that's going to be different in 6 months, and it's going to be very different in 18 months, most likely, right? And so I love the idea that it's this eternal round of
yes, it's always about the build. It's always about the build. And that's something I actually learned in dance, a student of dance. I studied modern dance since I was 4 years old. And, several teachers, but one in particular, when I was a young teenager, we were in, the releve is the position that the dancers take where they rise on the balls, the metatarsals of their feet. And we were extended out and up, and the teacher said, you never arrive. You are always extending. You have to imagine this like cord extending from the top of your head. And for whatever reason, that really stuck with me. I was like, yeah, you never arrive. And it's true in life. It's like, if you have that mindset, you're always learning. You're always curious.
Yeah, I love it. I was going to tell you, and I wrote it down, and I need to tell you before I forget, and we run out of time here, but and this is the only time I've ever shamelessly plugged multiple of our episodes, but I think you'll really be interested in this as well. 2 weeks ago, they're both top of mind. We interviewed, it was a while back that we interviewed her, but the episode that went live was with, her name's Only Love Alston. The reason I bring it up is because of something you said a long time ago. She, her name literally is Only Love, Onlei. It's an amazing name, but she's a minister. She's African-American. She grew up in foster care. She's an activist. She's amazing. But one of the cool things that we talked about, and this is why I bring it up, her last name, Alston, let me say something else. Her expertise and her study, she's got an honorary doctorate, a couple of master's degrees. And like I said, she's a minister. So she went to the seminary. She studies the African Hebrew connection. And so she taught, like in the Bible, like she talks about like the African connection to the Bible. It was a fascinating conversation. One of my favorite interviews that we've done. But she at one point did her family history, something Josh and I both are really passionate about as well, as ancestry. And she said something in our interview where she said, I'm not just myself, I'm also my ancestors and my descendants. That's how she sees things, which was powerful to me. And I loved that she said that. But anyways, Only Love Alston, her last name Alston, is the name of one of the top 10 slave owners in the South, Alston. So she realized that her family history was, a lot like a lot of African Americans, was in her name actually was from a slave owner that literally owned legally I think it was her great grandma. Anyways, I think you'd really enjoy that as well. The perspective and her view on things was so powerful. and inspiring.
Thank you. I wrote it down, and Will Reynolds.
Yeah. Will's the man too. So, there's a lot more that we could get into. I'm going to be respectful of your time. I already asked to push the meeting back a little bit, and then I asked you to stay longer, and I appreciate your patience. But you're inspiring, and the story of just kind of where you've been, where you've come from, where you're at now, your overall outlook and optimism, and the work that you've put in is amazing. We really appreciate you spending the time. My last question is, in a world right now where you've seen a lot of things, you've done business internationally, you've grown up in one place and gone to school in other places, you've got very unique perspective. What gives you hope in 2021 with all that's gone on in the past? It seems like we've just been the last 24 months or something. It's just been boom, 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 continuing to escalate. And there's been a lot of stuff going on. What gives you hope as you look to the future, personally, professionally, in your community, whatever it might be? What gives you hope at this point? Big question, I know.
It's a really big question. So first of all, let me start by saying I am hopeful. And to be honest with you, one of the signifiers that has helped me to start being hopeful is just the new leadership in the White House. I'm very impressed with the ways. So first, I am always impressed with people who have the capacity to shift, who have the capacity to reflect on what they messed up on, what hasn't gone so well, what they would do over and shift. For example, Elizabeth Warren is a political leader who, and it was an academic, became a political leader, was a Republican. And it was when she got outside of the four walls of the comfort of her, political office and started going into the courtrooms, the bankruptcy courtrooms, and started listening to the stories, the testimonies of families who were not irresponsible people. They weren't evil people who were going through bankruptcy. And she did the work to really understand from a policy perspective, how could this happen and how could we make it different? She was able to have what, Carol Dweck calls that growth mindset. She was able to change her mind. And similarly, President Biden made some choices policy-wise in the 90s that were responsible for a lot of the incarceration, a mass incarceration of a lot of African-American men. And he's able to look back on that time, first of all, articulate and admit that was not my best moment. That was wrong. That was not the right choice to do. And I think because of the personal tragedies in his life, he's had this capacity to have real perspective on what really matters in life. And when you hear his story about how much he's been wanting to be president, and now at his seasoned age he is, and the state of our country, I am hopeful that perhaps his life was destined for such a time as this, that all the tragedy that he went through, all the mistakes and setbacks he's been through have prepared him to be the sort of person who can model a mindset and a leadership style that we can, in our own ways and in our lives, embrace. So that gives me hope. I also am the stepmom to a 20-year-old. And when you have younger people in your life, that makes me hopeful. I learned from her all the time. It's just amazing to see the shift when, as a parent, you are the indoctrinator and trying to model things and support. And all of a sudden you're having real dialogue and conversation, and I ask her opinion on things, and that makes me hopeful. And thirdly, I'm in Philly. I'm now living, this is funny, kind of going full circle to our top of our conversation. I now live in the kind of house that when I was a little girl, I used to look out the window and say, oh, maybe one day I'll live in that kind of house. I didn't have my own room until I was a sophomore in college. My parents owned a duplex, 2 floors of two-bedroom apartments. I shared my room with my sister all my life. And I went to high school with kids who had their own wing to their house. And I now live in West Mount Airy, the other side of the avenue. And I live across the street from the woods. And yesterday I was able to take a midday walk in this beautiful winter wonderland because we've just had a lot of snow. And I got to tell you, as much of the craziness that can happen in any day, just being able to immerse myself in nature is always a reset. It always gives me perspective. There was a moment I'm trudging through the snow and I was like, I think that's a bird. And I stood stock still. And it was this beautiful bird song, these two birds just singing to each other in the middle of this really cold, wintry day. So it's what can be modeled for us. It's the people who are coming next after us. And it's our natural environment that really give me hope.
Very well spoken, like an amazing educator, bringing that all together perfectly. You're awesome, Natalie. It's a pleasure to meet you. I hope we can stay in touch. And is there anything in particular right now? I know you've got a couple books. You said you've got a book coming out. Is there where would you prefer that people find you or follow you or kind of stay tuned to everything that you're working on? Well,
first of all, Corey, Josh, thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation. I definitely plan for us to stay in touch. Your listeners can go to figure8thinking.com. That's FIGURE, the number 8 thinking.com. And they can actually, if they're curious, they can download a free sample chapter of the Creativity Leap. And I can send you this link later, Corey, but I'd love to leave them with a little gift. I have created a Wonder Rigor tip sheet. And so it lends some practical tips and ways that people can practice wonder and rigor in their life and their work. And it's actually, the link is a bit.ly link. So it's bit.ly/WR tips. And if you know bit.ly links, so you know they're case sensitive. So the W, the R, and the T are all caps. But I'll send you the link.
We'll put a link in the description. I got the link from you earlier, so we'll put it in the description so that everybody can go and participate in the free gift. We appreciate that.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. Very invigorating.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Enjoy that winter wonderland, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy Podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy Podcast.